He was America's most well-known wrestler. He was also impenetrable, unstoppable, and indestructible. What if the information you believed you knew about Hulk Hogan was only the beginning of a more profound and painful reality? What actually transpired during those final days, when the filming ceased and the narrative became silent? Wait till the very end, because what was found after his passing will leave you in complete awe. Prior to the bell becoming silent, he was not merely a wrestler. A real-life illustration of strength was Hulk Hogan. Stadiums erupted in cheers when fans noticed the muscles, bandana, and mustache. Behind the scenes, however, his body was deteriorating horribly and slowly. They have endured years of lifting big objects and bashing giants. By 2023, he had undergone over 25 surgeries, each leaving scars worse than the last. The most issue he was having was with his back. He had to have 10 difficult surgeries just to remain upright, due to years of mistreatment to his spine. The pain persisted even after the fixes. Even though every step he took was more difficult than the last, he continued to go out in public. He took this action to conceal the price of fame. To everyone else, he remained the hero. But on the inside, he was inconsolable. There was nothing spectacular about Hogan's existence behind closed doors. He needed assistance with daily tasks, like getting dressed and descending stairs. His legs were becoming numb by the end of 2023, and medical professionals warned him that it might not get better. In interviews, he grinned and laughed, but there was something more in his eyes. He didn't want his buddies to realize how weak he was, even if he was in pain. Although it wasn't commonly shown on camera, he used a cane. He stood tall during the ceremony, but as soon as no one could see him, he collapsed in agony. On the days when he was unable to leave his bed, he missed calls from friends and family. He felt more alone not because of his popularity, but because of the unrelenting suffering. Few realized how terrible things had gotten, but those who knew him well began to notice changes. In early 2024, Hogan received some unfavorable news from doctors. He may never again be able to walk unassisted. Fans and friends were unaware of this. Even those closest to him were unaware of the gravity of the situation. He was confined to a chair and found it difficult to move between rooms in his Florida home, where he spent the majority of his days. Painkillers didn't appear to help much, and neither did physical training. Still, he refused to publicly acknowledge defeat. A nurse who later searched for him behind his back described his daily struggle as sad. Hogan sat alone himself and watched his history on television after fighting in front of thousands of people. His room was filled with medals, belts, and pictures, but none of them cheered him much. Due to the rigorous regimen of therapy, rest, and solitude, he hardly ever left the house. The popular hero was preparing for another type of conflict. This portion of his story had never been shared in its entirety before. According to confidential documents from 2024, Hogan was diagnosed with an uncommon nerve condition that was connected to spinal injury. He gradually lost his ability to move and balance, and there was no immediate remedy. Instead of telling everyone, he chose to suffer in silence, so that his admirers wouldn't notice how horrible things were going. It wasn't until after his death that even his closest friends and family members knew the complete truth. He suddenly stopped attending important occasions, which was explained by this hidden ailment. He didn't want to appear weak in public or trip and fall in front of everyone. Hogan's pride depended on how he was perceived, and letting go of that was more painful than the surgery. As his sickness worsened, he came to terms with his legacy. However, he concealed the truth. Only after his death did everyone realize how serious his health issues were. Behind the celebrity and muscle was a man who was gradually losing his emotional, mental, and physical stability, and nobody anticipated it. The ascent was never intended to continue. When Terry Bollea was a child, there were no bright lights. He was shy, and he spent most of his time living alone in Tampa. He felt less confident and had little money. He used to play the bass guitar at bars as a form of escape. His life would alter when he discovered professional wrestling in his early 20s, but he had grander dreams before that. He found meaning in wrestling. He put a lot of effort into his workouts, making his body appear metal. He wasn't ostentatious at first. All he was doing was concentrating. But when Vince McMahon saw him, things clicked. He adopted the moniker Hulk Hogan. Terry Bollea also gradually disappeared behind the figure. Hogan's character had become a major figure in popular culture by the early 1980s. Children wore bandanas, torn shirts, and imitated his stances. He became more than simply a fighter, he became a brand. Toys, Saturday morning movies, and even cereal for breakfast were available. The Hulk gained widespread popularity outside of the wrestling arena. He made a lot of money, appeared in movies, and was the main attraction at WrestleMania. He was a symbol of courage, integrity, and American pride. Supporters believed he was unstoppable. However, the Hulk actor was disintegrating behind the scenes. More quickly than anyone had anticipated, it became more difficult to distinguish between the act and real life. You could never be weak as Hulk Hogan. Terry wasn't depressed, exhausted, or ill. For the cameras and fans, he had to repeatedly move, grin, and utter catchphrases. He didn't know how to refuse, and every moment of his existence was prearranged. Flights, appearances, and constant TV appearances also dictated his sleep habits. In public, he was a superhero. When he was by himself, he began to crumble. The role he played felt more significant than the genuine man inside of him. The pressure increased with each passing year. The weight became too much to bear. After making No Holds Barred in 1989, Hogan ended up feeling great. However, fans never witnessed what transpired. After an exhausting workday, he locked himself in his caravan and sobbed. After several years, he finally admitted that he had forgotten who he was. It was not a physical agony. It was losing your identity. The Hulk mask has taken over completely, he said. Everyone assumed he would always be gregarious, powerful, and vivacious. Terry, however, was depressed. He kept his depression a secret from everyone, including his closest pals. The world's strongest man was feeling quite weak inside. Hogan sacrificed Terry everything to become the Hulk. Numerous people's affection, money, and renown. However, it took more than it provided. He lost his personality, his solitude, and a great deal of calm. He was unsure whether he or the role he performed was liked by others. He could see from every mirror that Terry Bolla was no longer in command. The dissolution of a myth. By 2005, Hulk Hogan appeared to have it all. On his reality show, Hogan Knows Best, fans were given an up-close look at his family life. Behind the scenes, however, things were unraveling. Stress and distance were already causing problems in his marriage to Linda. The seemingly perfect house was gradually collapsing from the inside out. When his son Nick was in a vehicle accident in 2007 and severely injured one of his friends, things became worse. Because of the negative news coverage, Hogan was portrayed as a careless celebrity and a father figure who was not present. Their once close friendship began to erode when Brooks' music career hit a wall. As soon as things became unpleasant and the household disintegrated, Linda filed for divorce. It wasn't only a split that followed. The public dispute was widely reported in the tabloids. Both Hogan's finances and emotions suffered greatly. Homes and other possessions he had spent years building were among the millions he lost in the divorce. Behind closed doors, the man who had stood tall in front of multitudes felt isolated. In interviews, he stated that he struggled with depression and negative thoughts throughout this period. There was just loneliness and regret for him. Then, in 2015, the final strike occurred. It was discovered that Hogan had used racial epithets on private recordings. What remained of his reputation was destroyed by the video, which stunned the world. He was removed from the WWE Hall of Fame. Almost immediately, his name vanished from advertisements, history books, and merchandise. Sponsors dropped him right away. Calls from friends and well-known wrestlers stopped. The world turned its back on Hogan, who is now more famous for his terrible deeds than his good ones. The fact that the terms weren't made up was the worst. They were captured on film and were real. What he had said behind his back could not be undone. They were now used as weapons by the public. After suing Gawker Media for violating his privacy, Hogan received a sizable payout. However, it was too late to repair the damage to his reputation. He wasn't just a wrestler who had been humiliated. For all the wrong reasons, he was now in the headlines. For someone who once stood for honor and strength, it was a complete collapse. The affection he had lost from his admirers could not be restored by winning in court. Hogan remained silent following the trial. He avoided interviews and distanced himself from the spotlight. Once the face of a whole generation, he was now but a shadow in the world of professional wrestling. His mental haze was exacerbated by the medications he took during years of physical suffering. He stopped smiling, he stopped exercising, and he stopped believing that his name would ever be sung by the crowd again. According to reports, Netflix made him an offer for a biopic in 2020. Surprisingly, he declined. According to accounts, he told people that his story doesn't have a happy ending. No press release could ever express what that one statement did. Feeling awful wasn't the only thing involved. It concerned a man who was unsure of the true conclusion of his story. Hogan became much more lonely. He didn't trust many people, and he rarely left his residence. For years he had to cope with being the epitome of a decent man, Hulk Hogan. But when the disguise came off, Terry Bollea was left to face the quiet alone. He had doubts about the fans ever returning. And he wasn't sure for the first time. Hogan's final days were quiet and unheroic. They were isolated from the world that once loved him, silent and miserable. A silent farewell. In April 2025, Hulk Hogan made his final public appearance at a charity function in Clearwater, Florida. Many in the crowd didn't even recognize the man, who used to pack stadiums, as he stood placidly on a little platform. He appeared feeble, according to witnesses, with a pale face and a stiff gait that made even little movements look painful. His once renowned muscles had shrunk to mere shadows of their former bulk. Whispers were exchanged, but Hogan simply grinned, as though trying to distance himself. He was too tired to play anymore. Hogan concealed the harm his body had sustained for years. He had restricted mobility as a result of several back surgeries, and nerve damage had weakened his legs. It got harder to pass each appearance. He covered his agony with broad smiles, his weariness with dark glasses, and his loss of muscle with thick garments. However, the illusion broke in public for the first time in Clearwater. Hogan's health has deteriorated significantly behind the scenes. Early in the summer, he was fatigued from persistent illnesses, progressive muscle atrophy, and spinal nerve compression. He was exhausted just from moving from room to room. He stopped returning calls and only allowed a select group of close relatives to visit him. Hogan, who used to battle in front of cameras despite ripped ligaments and shattered ribs, now spends most of his days in bed. He allegedly requested to cease all treatments by the middle of July. According to the doctors, he knew what was coming and had given up fighting. Painkillers were no longer effective. He chatted and ate very little. Those last days were sluggish, silent, and filled with introspection. For someone who had lived his life on toughness and strength, Hulk Hogan died in his Florida home on July 24. Only his two grown children and his long-standing partner were standing solemnly at his side. There were no press releases, final pictures, or media circus. No opportunity, no farewell tour, no spectacular exit. It was the complete reverse of what his admirers had come to believe of him. This conclusion was terribly still for a man whose image was based on color, chaos, and explosions. Unlike the majority of celebrity deaths, this one wasn't tragic. The fade was more gradual. No overdose, no accident, and no dramatic headline occurred. Damage from years ago was finally catching up. However, in some ways, that quiet conveyed more information than any wrestling advertisement ever could. A sealed envelope was discovered on Hogan's bedside by his family after his passing. Neither his partner nor his children were the intended recipients. It was intended for his followers. A brief letter in his unsteady handwriting was inside. He expressed his gratitude to them for not only supporting him, but also for making him feel like a worthy cause. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself," was the most impactful line, revealing a side of Hogan that few had before noticed. The expense of fame, the weight of expectations, and the fissures beneath the surface had all left their mark. This was a silent farewell from a man who had done everything in his power to remain bigger than life, even when he didn't feel like it. There were only a few private tributes, silent declarations, and tears from those closest to him. There was no lavish funeral broadcast on television, no farewell entry music. It took time for the rest of the world to come to terms with the loss. This was more than simply a wrestler's demise. An era came to an end. The world wasn't suddenly shocked to learn of Hulk Hogan's passing. It made news in whispers and vanished as quickly. However, the stillness that remained spoke volumes to those who followed his journey. Nothing but the memories of a man who once dominated the ring and is now gone with little more than a farewell. No arena lights, no raised fists, no victory poses. We missed the true narrative while we celebrated for a hero. A man caught between his former self and his new self. Hulk Hogan carried the truth to his grave. There was more to Hulk Hogan than just wrestling. He altered the public's perception of the sport. He became a worldwide celebrity by transforming routine games into stadium events that sold out. But something more subdued was taking place behind the bright lights and boisterous applause. He was losing his true life. Fans saw vitality, charm, and courage, but they didn't see the suffering. Hogan's body was disintegrating. His family was in disarray. The character alone was what the world admired. He played Terry Bollea offstage, a guy who battled loneliness, despair, and guilt. Terry and Hogan were never the same again. Hogan could not be stopped. Terry was a person. Even when his body pleaded with him to quit, He had to bear the weight of continuing to be bigger than life. On TV, he grinned, but in private he was extremely hurt. He was worn out by years of pretending. He also became less of himself the more he acted out the role. He repeatedly provided it to the world because they wanted Hulk, but he had to turn into a cartoon character in order to live. Everything become armor, including the bandana, the flexing, and the catchphrases. Terry was withering underneath. Confined behind a mask he was unable to take off. However, few were aware of the things Hogan did behind closed doors. He visited ailing children, sat with wounded warriors, gave discreetly to children's hospitals, and coached young wrestlers with patience. He didn't look for cameras. All he wanted was to be treated like a human being once more. His mistakes were not erased by these actions, but they revealed a more genuine side than the spotlight could. Hogan had private notebooks in his last years that he never disclosed. "The man I couldn't be," he said. They were remorseful. Regret not being a better friend, spouse, or father. The legend was seen by everyone. In his own story, however, his writing exposed the man who felt alienated. He was looking for peace now, not for plaudits. Hogan gave wrestling his all in the end. His identity, his delight, his body. His passing was more than just a star's demise. It symbolized the passing of a person who was never allowed to be who he truly was. Thank you for viewing. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. For even more incredible information, click on the next video that appears on your screen.